Ah, hooray! You've found the new place. I'm sorry it's been a bit of a delay in getting you here. I mean, it took a while to get things out of boxes, but also then I had to rush off and lead a retreat in Woking. I've just got back on the train today, so it's very good timing. Welcome, 100 welcomes. Well, you can see we have a new library to have a spell in the library, and most, but not all, of the books are out on their shelves now. And everything's differently arranged, of course. It's a smaller study, but small but perfectly formed, as they say. And you can see I've kind of made myself at home. Samuel Johnson is still there. Now, what the chief thing you'll see is that look at this, wonderful. We kind of inherited these great pieces of pine board with the house and have set up things for the shelves. And the advantage of these, since I have a smaller space, is that they're deep enough to allow me to double shelf, because that's the only way I'm going to manage this. So here's an example of double shelving. You know, I've put the smaller books behind the bigger books, or in front of the bigger books. And of course, the trouble is you then have to organise by size and not by subject. I try a little bit. Look, there's stories from Dante and Dante's Purgatorio, and there's studies in Dante and some Dante translations, and that very nice Dante translation there. So I've kind of done it a bit. The same with Samuel Johnson here. There's some of my little volumes of Boswell's Life of Johnson, and there's my big collection of Johnson's works in a wonderful early 19th century edition. So there's a little bit of that. But frankly, I had to just get the books on the shelves, and here there are books that are obscuring the books behind them. I haven't got all the books out yet, but one of the nice things is that certain collections that had got scattered have come together now. So years ago, when I did my PhD, I did it on the sermons of John Donne, and on my pitiful small probationary teacher's income, I started to buy this beautiful scholarly edition of John Donne's sermons, and there it all is. And there is the wonderful works of Jeremy Taylor, who's one of the great prose artists of the early, look, there's one upside down, that's terrible, of the early 17th century. Wrote Holy Living and Holy Dying, and just beautiful things. Oh, there's another one, it's terrible. We're going to be sorting things out gradually. I've sort of got the slender volumes of modern poetry along there, but they've got mixed up with the bigger volumes of 19th century poet. There's my Shelley's poetical works. I've got a much smaller table, but I've managed to get the essential things, the pipes, the whiskey and the chess. And although everything else is smaller, I don't know if we can see it, we probably can't, it's probably too dark. But if you could see out there, you'd see beyond this, you'd see the new Temple of Peace, which is actually slightly larger than the old Temple of Peace. You'll have to come and visit me there, that'll be good. Double shelving works slightly better here. Do you remember I used to have all my Arthuriana on the big table? So now I've got all my Arthuriana, that's Arthuriana all the way along the back there, and then the smaller Arthuriana in front. But the rest of this, all of this really, well, there's some of my own books up there, but essentially from here on and all the way down there and there are all my Inklings things, and I've had to have those out and going because I've been writing a chapter on the allegory among the Inklings for the Oxford Handbook of Allegory. So I've had to have everything out for that, and there's all Charles Williams and C.S. Lewis and Owen Barfield. And then I thought, well, really they all derived from George MacDonald. So lots of my lovely George MacDonald and my early 19th century MacDonalds are there. I'll have to show you some of those sometime. I've got one of my guitars out, I can't manage that. Ross Wilson's nice well-read Shakespeare is there. But of course, there's a big blank here, and I'm going to have to rotate pictures. I have a really nice picture. Next time you come, I'll have chosen one, and they'll probably be different each time. I think I'll put my two Rebecca Marys that remind me of what I'm writing about in those two blank spaces there. So there's a lot of stuff, and there's a bit of shelves, but I haven't double shelved here because I've got tankards and bits and pieces to find. One of the nice things though is you rediscover things. I rediscovered my beautiful 19th century brass microscope. Those boxes over there. I love the kind of way in the 19th century arts and science were all one, you know. Coleridge was a friend of Humphrey Davy's, it was all there. And this lovely, rather strange, beautiful bear, it's a great rose crystal bear that my mother liked and loved and found and my parents had. And which I've now inherited from my mother. So anyway, look, let's take this nice chair out from here and turn it around. You sit down, and I'm going to fetch. I'll go over to the slim volumes of modern poetry. I don't think I've read this to you before. Oh, it's nice. I'm glad you found the place. It's not an easy place to find, North Walsham, but it's like this new study. It's small but perfectly formed. Anyway, I hope the new life is going to be, although I've begun it by finishing up some academic work, that really here and in the Temple of Peace, it's going to be about works of imagination. It's going to be about creative writing. It's going to be about carrying on with my Arthurian poetry and bodying forth the form of things unknown, as Shakespeare says the poet should do, finding emblems for things that once half intuited and giving them place and space in the mind through an act of imaginative embodiment. So I thought I'd read you. I'm very fond of the poetry of Rainer Maria Rilke, but I have the immense disadvantage of not having German. The only way I find you can read a poet in a language you don't understand is to have more than one translation. But I discovered through the work of this wonderful contemporary Scottish poet, Don Patterson, who's a superb craftsman, he makes a distinction between what he calls translating and what he calls versioning. And he thinks that if you're a poet and you're working on a translation of a poem, you shouldn't be slavishly translating word for word or phrase for phrase. You should be looking at the core and heart of the poem and remaking it as a poem that will live in its new language as a poem, rather than simply as a paraphrase and translation of another poem. And he did these extraordinary sonnets to Orpheus. Look, I actually met up with him on one occasion. He kindly wrote a little dedication in this book to me and signed it. I admire him immensely as a craftsman. I disagree with him about almost everything, including some of the technical things about poetry, but also, you know, he has a very reductive, materialist view of things. He perversely maintains, having written the most beautifully, spiritually luminous version of Rilke, he perversely maintains in his afterward that Rilke is not a religious or spiritual poet at all, but I beg to differ. But I deeply admire his gifts as a poet. Anyway, I'll just read you from this. This is a Faber. Published, this is about the original sequence of sonnets for Orpheus. Orpheus, of course, is the archetypal poet. Published in 1923, near the end of his life, the 55 sonnets to Orpheus were completed in less than a month, and famously described by Rilke as, quote, perhaps the most mysterious in the way they arrived and entrusted themselves to me, the most enigmatic dictation I have ever received. The whole first part was taken down in a single breathless act of obedience between the 2nd and 5th of February 1922, 99 years ago, without one word being in doubt or having to be changed. I love the idea of describing writing poetry as a single breathless act of obedience and something that arrives as entrusted. I think that's something about the nature of the imaginative work and the imaginative gift itself. Anyway, one of my favourite poems in this whole sequence is about just such an imaginative gift and entrusting, and it's called Unicorn. I don't know if you have ever seen the things about unicorns in medieval bestiaries. There's a very famous tapestry of a beautiful enclosed garden and a fine lady, a beautiful virgin crowned, sitting under a tree, and the unicorn trustfully coming and laying its head in her lap. And this was supposed to be a legend that the only way you could catch a unicorn or encourage a unicorn or bring a unicorn in its wildness to come to you was not by hunting it, but by this garden and the girl. And Rilke riffed on that. And of course, in the medieval bestiaries, the unicorn is a type of Christ, and the girl, the virgin in the garden, is the Virgin Mary, and Christ is that unique being who comes and then steps out into the world because of the obedience and the great yes of Mary. And I'm sure Rilke is aware of that, but he makes it also a type of every moment of imaginative incarnation. I personally believe that all moments of imaginative incarnation depend on the great incarnation. But let me read you this poem, and I think it's a beautiful poem, not only in Rilke's poetry, but in Don Patterson's utterly deft versioning of it. Unicorn. This is the animal that never was. Not knowing that, they loved it anyway. Its bearing, its stride, its high, clear whinny, right down to the still light of its gaze. It never was, and yet, such was their love, the beast arose where they had cleared the space, and in the stable of its nothingness it shook its white mane out and stamped its hoof. And so they fed it, not with hay or corn, but with the chance that it might come to pass. All this gave the creature such a power. Its brow put out a horn, one single horn. It grew inside a young girl's looking glass. Then one day walked out and passed into her. It's just so beautiful. But in terms of what poetry is, clearing a space, making the stable of its nothingness, feeding something with the chance that it might come to pass, and then this waiting, and it comes out of the looking glass. And to me, that still carries the mystical Christ incarnation sense, but also in a sense the magical moment of poetic creation. Anyway, I hope that in some ways, now that if you'd come here a few weeks ago, you wouldn't have been able to get into this room. It was just a mountain of cardboard boxes. But I've cleared a space by putting the books on their shelves, and I hope more, this whole move and this retirement and this new stage of life is clearing a space in which these beautiful things can walk through imagination into being in the world. Anyway, I'm very glad you found me again. Lovely to see you. See you again soon.